Even before I became a teacher, there's always been this strive for educational reform. The idea that what we do in our job can be done better, and to reach more people, and so forth. And they do all these comparisons between us and other countries and show that Americans are dumb as bricks. Well, I'm not so certain that's true. There's always been a lot of flawed methodology in how they do their statistics, and in spite of these revelations, they seem to ignore it. And well, let's face it, by the time I became a teacher, it was Goals 2000 by the Clinton regime. That was followed up by Leave No Child Left Behind by a successor, which I always thought was strange because, well, Goals 2000 should have already solved it. I mean, it was called Goals 2000. We should need a law in 2001. But leaving aside that, a lot of the education reform that is done is merely smoke and mirrors. First of all, it begs the question of those of us who are in education, or more importantly, those of us who are adults, we were educated by presumably a flawed system that we're now trying to fix. But yet, we're successful, aren't we? So something must have been done right for us. But where the sham comes about is you have this idea of these consultants, experts in the field. They draw from academia, and the research part of what goes on in education, learning, child psychology, and the whole bit. Well, at one time, I functioned within academia. I got out of it. Why? Because of the notion of research. What the people in educational research overlook, or what they try to bamboozle the rest of us into, is the fact that most research is being paid for by somebody else, whether it be by federal grant or by private grant and such like that. As I say in many times, if you take their money, you got to play by their rules. A lot of research that's done is tainted, because if you don't get the results that your patrons want, they're not going to give you any more money. So here's how the game is played within the education racket. They get a little bit of research done within a particular little group, whether it be inner city schools, or maybe rural schools, or maybe minority dominated, or whatever. They find some group, try something, and they get lucky, and then it works. And they publish it. And then comes the reform part of this. Most states have departments of education. Bureaucrats. Bureaucrats are not teachers. They're politicians, if anything else. So they read this research, and it sounds impressive. They get these great results. So then they inflict it upon those people within their bureaucracy, whether it be the schools or the teachers, to implement these things. In the school I teach in, there's been an outfit that has basically greased the palms in the State Department, and they come in to fix broken schools. And they've got all these glorious, salesmanship issues that they then impress upon the teachers, saying, this is how well we did in this other place. Yeah, what they don't tell you is that other place changed the rules. See, a lot of these consultant firms, they use data from past conquests, and usually in the form of test scores. The test scores came up because of our influence. Before, the test scores sucked, now they're great. And the consultants, or at least one of the groups of consultants that comes through my school, does this. And each year, then when they plug their program to us and how we need to do things their way, they cite this, kind of wield it over us. Well, there's complication. The state they use as their main, glory, was called on the carpet by 60 Minutes about 2 years ago. For see, that state changed their testing. Because of Leave No Child Left Behind, each state has to do their own version of testing. The federal government, they don't get into actually running the schools. That's the state's and the local job. They just finance it. But again, take their money, play by their rules. Here's what happened. The state of Georgia changed their test. They did a comparison between Georgia and their neighboring state of South Carolina and looked at 4th grade literacy. reading skills. In Georgia, about 70-some% of their kids passed the state test. In South Carolina, it was in the mid-20s. Now, does that mean that the kids in South Carolina are stupid? No. Because if you gave both groups the same identical test, the NEEP test, which is kind of national and international in framework, what happens? South Carolina students, they're in the mid-20s on the NEEP test, basically the same as their own state test. In Georgia, they're also in the mid-20s. Georgia and South Carolina do equally well. So how is it that Georgia does so spectacularly on their benchmarks? Well, 60 Minutes and CBS News asked them. And they said, well, because we tie it to retention, whether the kid can move on to the next grade, we had to weaken it. Otherwise, nobody would be promoted. We'd have kids stuck back in the 3rd and 4th grade and never move on because they couldn't pass the test if we did it the right way. So we had to cheat and make a cheaper test. Alright, so much for high standards. They had to lower the standards just to save their own phony baloney jobs. And speaking of phony baloney jobs, the thing that bothers me with these consultants, many of them had been teachers at one time, and they got out of it. If these consultants were so smart, we need them back in the trenches. We need them in the classroom. Because, maybe part of the problem is that our best and brightest are leaving. Those who can do. Those who can't are now consultants. And besides, you make more money as a consultant than actually doing the job which you're supposed to be an expert on. This whole education reform thing is a scam. A means of separating, the taxpayers and the states from their money in the form of consultant fees. Just my cynical view from the trenches.